Welcome to our video about social novels in the 19th and 20th century. This video is a brief overview of 4 novels besides Jude the Obscure that are of the social novel genre. We will summarize plots and read quotes and passages from each of the 4 novels: Little Dorrit, Great Expectations, Sister Carrie, and The Outsiders. In class, during our presentation, we plan to discuss the specific social criticisms each novel provides, and how these criticisms are similar to what Hardy provides in Jude the Obscure. While watching the video, try to make your own theories about social criticism in these novels, and how they might connect to Jude the Obscure, so that you can participate in discussion in the class. Our first social novel is Little Dorrit, written by Charles Dickens from December of 1855 to June of 1857. This novel was written as a series of parts, released monthly in a periodical, as many of Dickens's works are, including Great Expectations, a novel we will be discussing later in this video. Characteristic of Dickens, this piece introduces a plethora of seemingly unrelated characters right from the get-go, and pulls them together into an intertwined web of plot in the climax of the tale. Although Little Dorrit has a relatively happy ending, the novel provides an extensive criticism of the rigid English social class structure.
Summary.
This book starts out with the notorious French murderer Rigaud telling his cellmate how he murdered his wife. Next, Arthur Clenham is traveling from China to London after his father has died. As his father laid on his deathbed, he gave a pocket watch to Arthur, murmuring "Mother." Arthur assumes this is about his mother, Mrs. Clenham, and so he is headed to London to visit her. In London, there is a man named William Dorrit who lives in a debtor's prison, Marshalsea, with his 3 children, Fanny, Edward, and Amy, the last of whom goes by Little Dorrit. Amy is dedicated to her father and supports them both with her sewing. When Arthur arrives in London, he tells Mrs. Clenham that he does not wish to continue in the family business. Arthur thinks of the business as shady and doesn't want to be part of it. Mrs. Clenham soon employs Amy as a seamstress and treats her unusually kind. Since his mother is a bitter lady who is paralyzed and wheelchair-bound, Arthur thinks Amy must have something to do with the watch his father gave him that his mother won't explain to him. Arthur continually investigates the imprisonment of William Dorrit because he feels it is wrongful. During this time, he meets Daniel Doyce, who he helps fund to go to Russia on a business endeavor. Ultimately, Arthur discovers that William Dorrit is the long-lost heir to a fortune, and he is freed from the prison he was wrongly placed in along with his children. Amy, by this point, has fallen in love with Arthur, although he rejects her love. In their newfound wealth, William Dorrit, his brother Frederick, and his daughter Amy all take a trip through the Alps, Venice, and finally Rome. Here, both William Dorrit and his brother die, and so Amy returns back to London to her sister Fanny and her husband. Her husband's stepfather owns the bank that Amy and Arthur's money is in, and because of a scandal, the bank closes and Arthur and Amy are both imprisoned in Marshalsea. Arthur is very ill, and Amy nurses him back to health. Rigaud, now freed in London, knows the meaning behind the watch, and finds out that Mrs. Clenham has not made public the fact that she is not Arthur's birth mother, and tries to blackmail her. In fact, Mr. Clenham, Arthur's late father, had Arthur with a singer whom he loved. His rich uncle, however, forced Mr. Clenham to marry Mrs. Clenham, a woman of higher social class. Arthur's birth mother then died of grief from being separated from Mr. Clenham and Arthur. Feeling guilty, Mr. Clenham's rich uncle left a fortune and an estate to the youngest daughter of the singer's patron. This patron is the man who helped her throughout her life and happens to be Frederick Dorrit. Since he has no daughter, the money would go to his youngest brother's daughter, or Little Dorrit. Mrs. Clenham is stricken with emotion and rises from her wheelchair and walks from the house to confess to Amy. After doing so, she asks for forgiveness, which Amy kindly grants. And then Mrs. Clenham promptly collapses to the floor, never to have use of her limbs or speech again. Amy is released from the prison with this newfound wealth, and does not speak of what she learned to Arthur as to not hurt him. Daniel Doyce then returns from Russia with a successful turnout from his business endeavor. Arthur's investment returns, and he is now released from prison as well. Arthur apologizes to Amy for turning her love down earlier, and then they marry and live happily together in their wealth. Quotes: An old brick house, so dingy as to be all but black, standing by itself within a gateway. Before it, a square courtyard where a shrub or two and a patch of grass were as rank, which is saying much, as the iron railings enclosing them were rusty. Behind it, a jumble of roots. It was a double house, with long, narrow, heavily framed windows. Many years ago it had had in its mind to slide down sideways. It had been propped up, however, and was leaning on some half-dozen gigantic crutches, which gymnasium for the neighboring cats, weather-stained, smoke-blackened, and overgrown with weeds, appeared in these latter days to be no very sure reliance. It was an oblong pile of barrack building, partitioned into squalid houses standing back to back, so that there were no back rooms, environed by a narrow paved yard, hemmed in by high walls duly spiked atop. Itself a close and confined prison for debtors, it contained within it a much closer and more confined jail for smugglers, offenders against the revenue laws, and defaulters to excise or customs who had incurred fines which they were unable to pay, were supposed to be incarcerated behind an iron-plated door, closing up a second prison, consisting of a strong cell or two, and a blind alley some yard and a half wide, which formed the mysterious termination of the very limited skittle ground in which the Marshalsea debtors bowed down their troubles.
Another example of a 19th century social criticism is Great Expectations, written by Charles Dickens and published in 1861. This novel is about a man trying to break out of his social class so he will be worthy of a girl. Summary: Pip, a young orphan living with his sister and her husband in the marshes of Kent, a small town, sits in a cemetery one evening looking at his parents' tombstones. Suddenly, an escaped convict springs up from behind a tombstone, grabs Pip, and orders him to bring him food and a file for his leg irons. Pip obeys, but the fearsome convict is soon captured anyway. The convict protects Pip by claiming to have stolen the items himself. At his uncle's friend's house, he meets a beautiful young girl named Estella, who treats Pip coldly and contemptuously. Nevertheless, he falls in love with her and dreams of becoming a wealthy gentleman so that he might be worthy of her. He even hopes that Miss Havisham, her mother, intends to make him a gentleman and marry him to Estella. But his hopes are dashed when, after months of regular visits to the saddest house, Miss Havisham decides to help him become a common laborer in his family business. One day, a lawyer named Jaggers appears with strange news. A secret benefactor has given Pip a large fortune, and Pip must come to London immediately to begin his education as a gentleman. Pip happily assumes that his previous hopes have come true, that Miss Havisham is his secret benefactor, and that the old woman intends for him to marry Estella. In London, he expresses disdain for his former friends and loved ones, especially Joe, but he continues to pine after Estella. He furthers his education by studying with a tutor and learns how to act like a gentleman. When Pip turns 21 and begins to receive an income from his fortune, he secretly helps Herbert, a friend, buy his way into a business that he has chosen for himself. For now, Herbert and Pip lead very undisciplined lives in London, enjoying themselves and running up large amounts of debt. Several years go by until one night a familiar figure barges into Pip's bedroom, the convict Magwitch, who stuns Pip by announcing that he, not Miss Havisham, is the source of Pip's fortune. He tells Pip that he was so moved by Pip's boyhood kindness that he dedicated his life to making Pip a gentleman, and he made a fortune in Australia for that very purpose. Pip is appalled, but he feels morally bound to help Magwitch escape. He also learns that Miss Havisham taught Estella to break men's hearts, as revenge for the pain she felt when left at the altar. Pip was merely a boy for the young Estella to practice on. Miss Havisham is delighted in Estella's ability to toy with Pip's affections. Pip decides to go abroad with Herbert to work in the mercantile trade to try and repay some of their debts. Returning many years later, he encounters Estella in the ruined gardens at Satis House, the very same place where he kissed her on the cheek when they were young, the very same place where he fell in love with her. Pip and Estella leave the garden hand in hand, believing that they will never part again.
Quotes.
When I got into the courtyard, I found Estella waiting with the keys, but she neither asked me where I had been nor why I had kept her waiting, and there was a bright flush upon her face, as though something had happened to delight her. Instead of going straight to the gate, too, she stepped back into the passage and beckoned to me. "Come here. You may kiss me if you like." I kissed her on the cheek, and she turned to me. I think I would have gone through a great deal to kiss her cheek, but I felt that the kiss was given to the coarse common boy as a piece of money might have been, and that it was worth nothing. "I am instructed to communicate to him," said Mr. Jaggers, throwing his finger at me sideways, "that he will come into a handsome property. Further, that it is the desire of the present possessor of that property that he be immediately removed from his present sphere of life and from this place, and brought up as a gentleman, in a word, as a young fellow of great expectations." My dream was out. My wild fancy was surpassed by sober reality. Miss Havisham was going to make my fortune on a grand scale. "Now, Mr. Pip," pursued the lawyer, "I address the rest of what I have to say to you. You are to understand, first, that it is the request of the person from whom I take my instructions that you will always bear the name of Pip. You will have no objection, I dare say, to your great expectations being encumbered with that easy condition, but if you have any objection, this is the time to mention it." "I have thought of you often," said Estella. "Have you?" "Of late, very often. There was a long hard time when I kept far from me the remembrance of what I had thrown away when I was quite ignorant of its worth. But since my duty has not been incompatible with the admission of the remembrance, I have given it a place in my heart." "You have always held your place in my heart," I answered. I took her hand in mine, and we went out of the ruined place, and, as the morning mists had risen long ago when I first left the forge, so the evening mists were rising now, and in all the broad expanse of tranquil light they showed to me, I saw no shadow of another parting from her.
Written in the year 1900. Our next social novel is Sister Carrie, in which Dreiser touches upon a wide range of themes: the American dream, competition, immorality, identity, sex, struggle, materialism, wealth, and poverty. Among these, some of the most prevalent themes are naturalistic themes such as immorality and sex. Throughout the novel, he does not exude judgment on his characters and instead speaks of acts like prostitution as regular, everyday occurrences.
Summary.
Caroline Meeber, known as Sister Carrie by her family, is a pretty and young country girl. When she turns 18, she leaves home and travels to Chicago by train. During the ride, she meets Charles Druitt, who is a traveling salesman. Soon she becomes interested in him due to his fine clothing and manners. We can see Carrie as a girl of great appeal, and she uses sex to bring herself wealth and higher status. In order to live a decent life, she lives with Druitt and becomes his kept girl. Later, Carrie sees that another man, Hurstwood, can offer her an even higher standard of living. Regardless of Druitt's feelings and the fact that Hurstwood is already married, she breaks off with Druitt and gets married with Hurstwood. After living with Hurstwood for some time, she realizes she can no longer benefit from this man and leaves him too. This is immoral in the eye of the traditional morality defender, and she should be severely punished. But on the contrary, she climbs up the social ladder smoothly and becomes a famous actress in the end of the novel. Quotes. "We see man far removed from the layers of the jungles, his innate instincts dulled by too near an approach to free will, his free will not sufficiently developed to replace his instincts and afford him perfect guidance. He is becoming too wise to hearken always to instincts and desires. He is still too weak to always prevail against them. A man's fortune or material progress is very much the same as his bodily growth." She looked into her glass and saw a prettier Carrie than she had seen before. She looked into her mind, a mirror prepared of her own and the world's opinions, and saw a worse. Between these two images she wavered, hesitating which to believe.
The final example of a social criticism that we will be using in class is the novel The Outsiders by S.E. Hilton, written in 1967. This is a very popular book among our generation, and many people have probably read it. This novel is centered around the feud between the Greasers and the Socs being the higher class boys and the Greasers being the lower class. Summary. Ponyboy Curtis belongs to a lower-class group of Oklahoma youths who call themselves Greasers. One night, Ponyboy is attacked by a group of Socials, or Socs, the Greasers' rivals, who are upper-class youths from the west side of town. The Socs gang up on Ponyboy and threaten to slit his throat. A group of Greasers comes and chases the bullies away, saving Ponyboy. The next night, Ponyboy and his friend Johnny go to a movie. They sit behind a pair of attractive Soc girls. Dally, their friend, flirts with the girls, but leaves after Ponyboy and Johnny tell him to stop harassing the girls. Johnny and Ponyboy then sit with the girls. They start to walk back to their house to drive the girls home when they run into the girls' boyfriends. The girls must leave with their boyfriends in order to prevent a fight between the Socs and the Greasers. Ponyboy is late getting home, and his brother Darry is furious with him. They get into a huge argument, and Darry hits Ponyboy, causing him to run away. He then finds Johnny, and the two boys head for the park. They then bump into the boyfriends and a group of Socs. The Socs attack, holding Ponyboy's head under the frigid water of a fountain until Ponyboy blacks out. Ponyboy regains consciousness to find himself lying on the ground next to Johnny and Bob, one of the boyfriends. He looks over and Bob is dead. Johnny says to Ponyboy that he only killed Bob because they were going to drown Ponyboy and beat up Johnny. The two boys run away with the help of their friend Dally, and they hide out in a church. After several days, Dally comes to check on them, telling them that the tensions between the Greasers and the Socs have escalated and a rumble is to take place the next night to settle the matters. They have had one of the Soc girls on the inside feeding them information. Johnny then says he wants to turn himself in for the murder of Bob. As they walk to the car to drive home, they see that the church they were staying in has caught fire and school children are caught inside. Ponyboy and Johnny rush into the fire to save the children. As they get the last child out, the roof caves in and Ponyboy passes out. He comes to in an ambulance and is diagnosed with minor burns and bruises. Dally is not badly hurt either, but Johnny's back was broken by the falling roof and he is in critical condition. Ponyboy and Johnny are portrayed as heroes in the papers, but Johnny will be charged with manslaughter due to killing Bob. The two boys are also to go to court to have a judge decide whether or not to send them to a home for boys. The next night at the Rumble, the Greasers defeat the Socs. Dally shows up just in time for the fight, having escaped from the hospital. After the fight, Ponyboy and Dally hurry back to see Johnny and find that he is dying. When Johnny dies, Dally loses control and runs from the room. Ponyboy stumbles home late and tells his brothers and friends that Johnny has died. Dally then calls to say that he has robbed a convenience store and the cops are after him. The Greasers hurry to find him, but they are too late. This is the last straw for the night, and Ponyboy passes out. They all watch as Dally raises his gun at the policeman, and they gun him down. This is the last straw for Ponyboy, and he faints.
Quotes.
We get jumped by the Socs. I'm not sure how you spell it, but it's the abbreviation for the Socials, the jet set, the West Side rich kids. It's like the term greaser, which is used to class all boys on the east side. We're poorer than the Socs and the middle class. I reckon we're wilder too. Not like the Socs, who jump greasers and wreck houses and throw beer blasts for kicks and get editorials in the paper for being a public disgrace one day and an asset to society the next. Greasers are more like hoods. We steal things and drive old souped-up cars and hold up gas stations and have a gang fight once in a while. I don't mean I do things like that. Darry would kill me if I got into trouble with the police. Since Mom and Dad were killed in an auto wreck, the three of us get to stay together only as long as we behave. So Soda and I stay out of trouble as much as we can, and we are careful not to get caught when we can't. I only mean that most greasers do things like that. Just like we wear our hair long and dress in blue jeans and t-shirts, or leave our shirt tails out and wear leather jackets and tennis shoes or boots. I'm not saying that either Socs or greasers are better, that's just the way things are.